Hello. Hope you're all nice and awake after lunch. And yeah, I'll just get started. We've got a lot to get through. Is this working? Yes. I'm Carole. I'm a development team lead at Equator in Glasgow, which is why I have this accent. So if I start to speak too fast, just give me a wee wave. I'm a .NET developer. Used to do Java, but we keep that quiet, but Doug outed that yesterday. And I organise a bunch of meetups back home. The Glasgow Umbraco meetup, yay. And Ladies of Code, which, as it sounds like, is a group for women who code to get together and share knowledge. And also some involvement with Scottish developers, which includes DDD Scotland, which was good fun. But I'm not just saying this to show off. It's hard work, but this kind of, as well as the technical side of things, I've got a real interest in the community side of things and the people side of tech, and I think the people are the most important part, not just lines of code. So I want this to be more like a conversation, or the start of a conversation, rather than me up here telling you all the facts, because with it being the people side of things, it's not a right or a wrong. You can't just Stack Overflow it and get the right answer, unfortunately, and that would be great. But this is based on my kind of 12, 13 years in and around the industry, based on chatting to friends, reading a lot about this kind of stuff. And yeah, hopefully it's just the start of a conversation. So I'm going to talk about empathy and why it's important for us in tech. So I'm not going to read it out to you, but here's the dictionary definition. But I like to just basically think of other people. Put yourself in their shoes and think about how they might be feeling at any particular moment. And act accordingly for that. I think that's maybe the distinction between sympathy and empathy, rather than just feeling sorry for someone. It's more feeling what it must be like to be them, and how can you help. So why talk about this? We're techies, we write code, we just build products, we just work with machines, so we don't need to care. But I think we do. But I think there is sometimes a lack of industry, and a lack of empathy in industry, and I think it's something we should talk about more. And it's not just me wanting to talk about emotions and stuff. It's actually got a business impact and a technical impact, which we'll get to. So I thought, based on seeing it's a developer conference, although I know a lot of people aren't, I'd start off with how are we as developers treated. Hands up if you're a developer. Okay, so quite a lot. Yeah. Hands up if you have been called a resource. Hands up if you've referred to other people as resources. Yeah. I understand that there is a business word for referring to us as the people who do things. But I really ask people not to call developers or anyone resources. I think it's quite dehumanizing. It takes away the fact that we're people, and can be quite bad for morale too. Arguably, in my opinion, people are better than resources because people care. If you meet a deadline, they care about what you're building. And yeah, these are real life people working on the products. So try and think, if your resource maybe isn't as productive one day, why? You might have had a bad night's sleep because you've got a kid. You might have family problems. You might be feeling unwell because resources get ill too. So we need to realise that these resources, or people, are just like ourselves. And I found this really nice article written by a guy, Paul Santaga, take my notes, yeah, at Google. Google aren't always the company to aim to be like, because they've got a lot of problems, but I really liked this. And he talks a lot about psychological safety, which we'll get onto, but I really liked this just like me thing when we're talking about empathy. And he breaks it down into this person has beliefs and perspectives and opinions just like me. They've got hopes, anxieties and vulnerabilities just like me. And again, I'm not going to read through them all, but I really liked it as a way to stop and think when you're really mad at someone, which we all get, or when you just can't agree with someone, just stop and think, wait, they're just like me. They've not purposely committed code that's broke the build. They've not purposely not met a deadline, I assume. So I think I really like this as a rule to apply, and I think I probably should use it more as well when maybe getting a bit frustrated with people. Yeah, I think it's quite a nice thing. And moving on from that, that was actually when he was talking about psychological safety, and I'll read it from here because I want to get it right. It says, the highest performing teams have one thing in common, which is psychological safety, the belief that you won't be punished when you make a mistake, which I think is a really nice way to put it. And this came from another study by Google. They've got lots of money to spend on these things. And they found that the highest performing teams weren't those with the best engineers on them. It was the teams that had psychological safety. You could have total rock stars all on one team and kind of average engineers on one team. But as long the teams that had psychological safety, that safety to take moderate risk-taking and to speak up even if it's wrong, to make mistakes and help each other, are the best performing teams. So I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And this came out of that. It was Project Aristotle, if you want to look it up. And psychological safety is at the top there. And leading down from that becomes dependability from your team, structure and clarity, meaning. If people have meaning in their work, then they're more likely to care. And impact. People want to feel like the work they're doing has an impact. And although this is meant for teams at work, I think that this would actually be really good for community. If we have a safe community where we can make mistakes, we can speak up even if it's wrong, you know that you're not going to be called out for it. People will then dependably contribute more, there'll be more structure and clarity, people will have meaning, and there'll be more impact with the work they do. They'll do more pull requests, they'll do more conference talks and stuff like that. So yeah, that was the first topic I really wanted to talk about when we're speaking about developers. And another thing I've noticed people a lot actually recently talking about is developer burnout. And I just wanted to talk a bit about what I think the causes of that might be. There's this concept of crunch culture. So when you've just got to always get something done, you've just got to work all the hours because you've got a deadline, and companies enforcing that really. There's a really good and bad example of that was, does anyone play games and play Red Dead Redemption 2? Yeah, so they looked like they weren't going to meet the deadline, so they decided to do a press release saying, don't worry, we are working ridiculous hours to get this out the door. And as an engineer, I'm like, why are you boasting about that? Like, oh yeah, we're running our developers into the ground so you can get a game. Like, yeah, I just think it's a really bad example to set because they are rock stars. And putting that out there makes it okay for other companies to do it because, hey, they made hundreds of millions of dollars off of that. I think some of it we enforce on ourselves. So, like side projects, we work hard all day. When we were learning new stuff, it was really mentally exhausting, and then we decide to go home and work on side projects or contribute to open source, which we all love to do. We attend events and meetups, which again, even if you are just sitting in an audience, it's exhausting after you've been at work all day. I know that I've got a lot of friends who are fans of 100 Days of Code, but I worry, I've not done it myself, but I worry that a lot of people that do this are new. And are we just setting an example for people coming into the industry, like, yeah, you're going to have to code every single day. Some days I don't code at all, and that's fine, mostly at the weekends. And there's also this constant need to keep up with all the new frameworks. It feels like there's a new cool framework every time I check Twitter, and it's just impossible to keep up. And I think as developers, we have to realise that sometimes you're going to have lots of time to contribute to open source or to do side projects and stuff. And sometimes you're just going to be really, really busy at work. So you might need to just take a bit of a break with that stuff. And that doesn't mean that you're failing. That's okay. And when things are a bit quieter in real life or at work, then you can pick up this stuff too. I know I'm really bad for this myself, so do as I say, not as I do, because I know I do spread myself too thin, I guess, and I realised that towards the end of last year when I then had a big project at work, as well as trying to do meetups and contribute to open source and things like that. So I think this is something we need to do to look after ourselves as developers. So I want to talk a bit about recruitment, and this is the bit, when I gave this talk at a local meetup, there was lots of conversation around which I really didn't expect, but it was. So recruitment is hard. Is there any people who have to do recruitment in the room? So you'll agree that recruitment is hard. I don't know if other cities are the same, but in Glasgow we need more developers. There are too many jobs and not enough developers. So let's make life easy on ourselves and make sure that we're welcoming everyone into the recruitment process that we can. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think it's just important to have a bit of a think about what your recruitment process is. Are you excluding people from coming to work with you, and you could be missing out on really good engineers? So there's a lot of places that do trials with the team as part of the interview process. And I remember, I think it was back when I was a graduate, a company wanted me to go in for 2 days, 2 whole days, to work with them to see if I fit with the team. For me, that's a big red flag for a company if they want me to take 2 unpaid days and take holidays off of my holiday allowance from my current place to see if I'm good enough. I do understand the need for them, and the same with technical tests, but I think there are better ways to do it and more inclusive ways to do it, because who are the people that are going to have time to take days off to come to do your trials? You might be excluding parents or people with family commitments or people with other jobs that they aren't willing to take the risk of using their holidays to come work with you. Let's try and fix this. Better. Whiteboard test. Has anyone done a whiteboard test? Well, thankfully not that many. It's so terrifying. I'm quite a good developer, quite an experienced developer. If you made me do like a graduate level development test on a whiteboard, I would fail big time, because it's just an intimidating situation. I can't think of anything worse. So we do whiteboard, like, sketching out new projects and stuff in work. But again, it's a psychological safety thing, because I know those people and I know that it's safe to fail. But in an interview, you don't know the company culture yet. So just think of, you're not getting the best out of people, and you might mark someone as not a good developer and not hire them, when actually they're really good, and that just doesn't suit their personality type. Job ads is something I could talk about for a long time, but I won't. If you want to look up for the wording of job ads, you might be excluding people before they even apply, because you might be really blatantly, sometimes people still put he and him in job ads, which is ridiculous. And sometimes it's more subtle. There's kind of wording that you'll only get certain personality types applying, like when you're looking for code ninjas and rock stars and things like that. And I think an important one is, as well, look at what you're putting in your job spec. Do you need someone with a first-class honours degree? Or could you take someone from a boot camp? Or someone who's self-taught? Or someone who's switched from another career? Again, you might be missing out on really good developers just because they've not got a degree, and that's a little bit old-fashioned there, I think. So this is the good bit. How do we treat each other as developers? We can be an opinionated bunch of people, often not empathetic enough, I think, hence the talk. So let's get into it. I'd really like to talk about the language that we use. I'm not trying to be the fun police, just for the record. Like, it's not like, you said that thing and you're wrong, that means you're mean. It's more just being a bit more mindful about words that we use and the impact that words can have on people, even like unconsciously, you don't mean to do it. So what's good is, Owen already covered a bit of this earlier, so you've done my job for me, it's amazing. easy. So if you go, oh yeah, it was easy, I just done this really, really complex process and then committed it and it just worked and it was amazing. Just think of the people that are there who've never done that before. Maybe they're from a different tech stack or they're less experienced. Straight away, they're so intimidated that they might not want to join you or contribute to your project. Again, you don't mean it. It's just because I think it's because we try and play down our abilities as developers. We're not naturally going to boast. It's like, oh, it was easy. I just done this really hard thing. It was fine. Just, which was I think the one that you used, yeah, in a tutorial. Just do this thing, and you're like, I want a tutorial for that thing. That's the hard bit. If I can't do that, how can I possibly do the rest of it? This one's interesting. Oh, you use Angular? Wow, you not used Vue yet? No one uses Angular anymore. Maybe that's a bit of a close one. Go back, I'll change it to something else. Yeah, so people don't always have the time to have learned the cool new framework yet. Maybe their project hasn't allowed for it. Maybe they've not had the time or they've been focusing their energy somewhere else. I know it just means that people are trying to advocate for Vue or whatever it is, but just think about how that might make the other person feel. Real developers, don't get me started on real developers. I've been told I'm not a real developer quite a few times. Real developers real developers use Visual Studio Code. Real developers use this thing or that thing or that thing. We can't be the gatekeepers for what a real developer is. We have to make sure we're welcoming more people in rather than shutting them out just because they don't do what you think a real developer does. Like I mentioned, people will often still refer to the default developer as he and him. So if you are writing a job ad, definitely don't do it. If you're doing a conference talk and you're talking about a hypothetical developer, please don't say he or him. If you are doing a tutorial and you say, oh, so your developer just needs to pull this down and then he will do this. Please don't do it. It's a really simple one. Proofread stuff, practice your talks, because it's just really blatantly excluding people. This one isn't even a kind of subconscious one. It's just really blatant. One thing, though, I do have empathy for is people who aren't English speakers when they're doing talks and stuff, because I realise that that's not fair, and that, yeah, you're okay. Try not to, but I understand. Guys, this one's great. If you want strangers on the internet to explain how language changes through time and to send you screenshots of dictionary definitions of guys, you should tweet about this. It's really good fun. So I do understand the change of language through time. People say you guys, hey you guys, I get emails, hey guys. That's one thing. I think if you're in a position of power, you're giving a talk or you lead a team or something, try not to. So that one, I understand possibly how it's used. But if you are talking about, we need a new developer, we're looking for a front-end guy, or we need to get a guy in for that, it's a bit like the he and him thing. Please don't refer to hypothetical developers as guys, because you're just excluding people. And yeah, I'd really rather you didn't do it. And even if you don't understand why it might exclude people, or because, oh yeah, so people use guys for girls as well, you might not need to understand why that we use it and why it's excluding. But if we tell you that it is, just don't do it. Try not to do it. Unless you're really, really strongly attached to the word guys, maybe it's got some sentimental meaning to you. Otherwise, just don't use it, and everyone will get along better. So I've got some alternatives. People who know me know I like to say pals a lot. Or if you're saying one of the guys will work on this, one of the developers will work on this. Confession, I'm guilty of this because I worked with a team of all male developers until about a year ago, and I used to say, oh, it's fine, we'll get one of the guys to do it. And I had to correct myself. So no one's perfect. But making an effort really does go a long way. Even if you accidentally slip and say the wrong thing, just correct yourself. If anything, you'll seem even better. And we do notice, I went to a couple of talks and made comments to friends afterwards, like, they said y'all, and they said folks instead of guys, and it just makes you happy. So it might seem that we're being a bit sensitive. Oh yes, you said guys once and I shouted at you. It might have been like the 5th time it's happened that day, or I've already been asked if I'm a designer, or been told I don't look like a developer, which I really like this, even though it breaks my heart a wee bit, I really like this cartoon. So try and have empathy for if someone does correct you or gets a bit mad. This is why. You get this all the time, constantly, and you start to feel like you don't belong. When you're obviously, clearly don't fit the mould, and these words are constantly telling you that, hey, by the way, you don't actually fit the mould. This is not just as women, but from like other minorities in tech as well. By improving your language and using different wording, you will make your team more diverse. And as we'll get onto later, diverse teams are more productive and they make more money and better products. So while we're here and we're talking about this, I am emotional. I'm very attached to these things. I do get emotional in the workplace. Don't sit crying at my desk and stuff, but it's because I care. And I think that people with emotion, engineers with emotion, are better engineers, we're better leaders, we're better mentors, we work better with our clients because we care. And we're humans, and humans have emotions, so we just don't want to sit and code all day saying that we're engineers, we don't need to worry about that. It actually makes you stronger at your job. Oh, wrong way. Okay. So this kind of brings us into the diversity and inclusion part, which I know are 2 big buzzwords that people kind of roll their eyes a wee bit at, but hopefully can make it a bit more relatable and realise the little things that we can do. So I like this quote: diversity is about being invited to the party and inclusion's being asked to dance. Which I think is really nice. Don't ask me to dance, I'm not very good at dancing. Metaphorical dancing would be lovely. Because, yeah, maybe a bingo, but I think we know that won't happen. So have a think about the reasons why people might not have the same chance to be included as you, even if they're as good as you, and then act upon it, because that's the difference between diversity and actually including people in. And this is like kind of cheat sheet that I thought of. So I really like to think of as thinking of the advantages that you have that other people might not have, and listening to the stories of others, and using those stories to consider challenges that they face that you just might not have thought of. And that's fine. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person. You've just not experienced someone else's experience. I think an important thing to do is believe when people tell you that their experience is different than you. You quite often hear, oh, well, I've never seen that happen. I've worked with lots of women and they just get on with it. It's like, okay. But believe what I'm telling you is my experience and other people is their experience. And then if you've got any kind of influence on the environment, make changes that make the environments that little bit more inclusive. You can change your wording and things like that, which we're going to get onto. Sorry. So I just want to clear up this one. There's lots of people say, oh, well, diversity and inclusion, so are we just going to lower the bar just so we can have more women and minorities on the team? Or at the conference, or whatever that is? No, absolutely not. It's not lowering the bar. It's giving people the same chance to get to the bar. That bar stays where it is. And arguably, it's probably going to get higher because there are more people with different skill sets. There's more people applying for the job, applying for the speaker's position, whatever it is. The quality is only going to get better from there. So I really don't appreciate when this is the argument of inclusion means lowering the bar. It absolutely does not. So I like this as an exercise of a bit of a self-assessment on what challenges other people might face that you've never thought of, or advantages that you might have. Because everyone's experience is different. So I obviously know what it's like to be a woman in tech, but I really have the advantages of, I'm kind of the average age of people in tech. I don't have the challenges of people of colour or people from the LGBTQ plus community. So straight away there, I've got advantages that others don't have, and there are challenges that I just can't appreciate firsthand. An educational background is a really interesting one because I am lucky enough to come from a country where I can get a degree for free. So being from a background where I probably wouldn't have been able to pay for university. Living in Scotland, I can get a computing science degree. That's an advantage at the moment still, because people see that as quite often what an engineer needs to have. So have a think about people that have retrained, they've self-trained, they've maybe done boot camps, and what challenges they may have coming into industry, making them do whiteboard tests for bubble sort or something like that. Like, yeah, you learn it at uni, but when was the last time you used it in industry? An important one, I know there's been a bit of a chat around in the community, is parents and carers in tech, and not being able to go to meetups or other considerations that people who don't have kids like myself or don't have dependents just wouldn't think of. And similarly for people with disabilities or people with different religions, think of what might be blocking them from coming to your meetup or your conference or even for an interview. Just realise what challenges they might have and how can you unblock those challenges. And cultural differences, one that I'm quite conscious of is in Scotland we swear a lot, and that's normal, and that's fine. But when I'm giving a talk, I try not to, because it's not as acceptable in all countries. So I think it's important to always think of other people's opinions and beliefs and try and take them into consideration. Because not everyone has the same background, and that's a good thing, as we'll get to, because, as I say, it makes your team better, more diverse, and more profitable. So going back to this slide again, now that we've kind of had a bit of a self-assessment, hopefully you can realise what advantages you have, challenges that others have, and how you can act upon them, or at least be conscious of them and notice when people are coming up against those challenges. So you're like, why do I care? There are some good examples of why having a diverse team is actually a really good thing. Those in the top quartile, can't say that word, for ethnic and racial diversity in management were 35% more likely to have financial returns above the industry average. So more diverse teams can cater for more customers and they are more profitable. Companies with more women were more likely to introduce radical new innovations to the market over a 2-year period. So with diversity, you get innovation. Profit plus innovation. Why would we not want a diverse team? These are maybe more the negative side, but 30% of female engineers leave industry. So this is not specifically software engineering, this is all engineering. And women specifically leave tech at a 45% higher rate than men. So a lot of people will say, oh, but that's because women go and have kids. Well, you don't just fall off like the face of the earth as soon as you have a kid. So there's something clearly that tech is doing to maybe make it less. Do you have flexi time? Do you have good maternity leave? Do people feel comfortable in the team or in your culture when they've become a mother? You have to think about it. But also the stats show that we're leaving for reasons of not being treated fairly, paid well, and all of those things. So it's a bit of a cop-out when people blame it on being a mum. And 40% of tech leavers left due to unfair treatment. So this was from a study that I can share, that when they asked people why they were leaving, 40% was because of unfair treatment. And the cost of that from that same study, this is an American one, was $16 billion a year. So we've already said recruitment is hard. Recruitment costs a lot of money. And just think of all the cool stuff, like innovative stuff Silicon Valley could have done if they didn't waste this money on retention and recruitment. So there is a financial impact of inclusion. And I think there's also the reputational cost as well. So this is obviously financial cost, but there's a reputational cost for company too, because people speak to each other. And I don't know if it's the same in other communities, but in Scotland, a lot of developers tend to know each other, or they know someone that knows someone who worked there. So it's important for companies to think of the financial and the reputational costs of making sure they've got a good culture. So now I want to move a bit more on to the specifically developer side of things and think about code reviews. Because code reviews are really scary. Does anyone else find it really scary to commit your code sometimes, or do a pull request or anything like that? So I think it comes down to psychological safety as well, a bit like when we're talking about teams. Because if you've got a culture that says you can fail, you can give positive feedback, you're not going to be punished for putting yourself out there, that's where code reviews can be a really, really productive thing. Just a bit of an exercise, I won't ask you to put your hands up, but think about the last time in a code review you gave a positive rather than just, hey, fix this thing. When's the last time you put, hey, that is a really, really sweet way to do that, well done. And if you've not, maybe start and implement that. I thought empathy in open source was a good one to think about because we're at an open source event, we're members of open source community. Open source isn't always, I think we live in a little bubble where we think that it's this really friendly, collaborative place, which luckily Umbraco is, but it isn't always. But I always say, find an open source community that when you walk in, as well as asking you about APIs and stuff, they ask to see your nails. That, for me, is a sign of an open source community that you're going to be welcoming. But unfortunately, not every open source community is quite like Umbraco. Statistically, women in open source have their pull requests accepted more than men. Sit smug for a minute. Only when their gender isn't identifiable, which really breaks my heart. So as soon as your profile picture or your username gives away your gender, it suddenly isn't as accepted. And there's, again, been some people thinking, oh, okay, so was that women contribute more to documentation or front-end tasks or smaller tasks? No. Across the board, different tech stacks, big and small projects, documentation, completely across the board, which I found really, really interesting. And it was accepted at 78%, whereas code by men is 74%. So I've got this one after chatting to, I'm lucky enough to have lots of friends in open source, and for open source project owners, I've got empathy for, because a lot of the time they're doing this in their free time. It's a side project, and you, from what I've seen and heard, you constantly have people asking questions, expecting help, maybe being a bit aggressive or sassy when you don't give them help or when you don't have time to give them help. So when we're leaving GitHub issues or feedback on Twitter, I think just think about this and realise that a lot of the time people are doing this for free on top of their actual jobs. And if you've got opinions on how things are implemented or improvements that could be made, think of the most constructive, empathetic way to give that feedback. So I do a lot of meetups and conferences. I am lucky enough to organise some groups and be parts of communities back home too. So I have a lot of opinions on meetups and how they're run and how we can make it more inclusive for everyone. I've got this like beer and pizza culture, which a lot of developers, when you go to development meetups, it's like, oh, we'll get the beers and pizzas in and we'll talk about React or whatever it is. Did we just have a little bit of a think about, there's a bit of the kind of bro culture in tech often in Silicon Valley. This kind of just fulfills this a wee bit. So if you are going to have beer and pizza, that's fine. Try and have some alternatives, but think about the way that you word it. So don't make it the activity, make it a thing alongside the activity. Make sure the activity is the tech stuff and that people are going to feel welcome. I know that there was a local meetup back home that for a long time they always had their meetup in a pub, which is easy to organise, and I empathise with that as a meetup organiser. But they found that when they moved to offices after years of being in pubs, their attendances went up because people were, and it was more diverse groups, because people were then more likely to go along, because walking into a pub is quite intimidating when you don't know everyone, and they're actually a really friendly group, and it's one of my favourite meetups now, so I'm glad they've moved out of pubs. And try and have some alternatives too. It's a bit weird putting a tweet that I'd done, but people always talk about it at meetups. When we don't have beer and pizza, it's like, finally not a pizza. Because if you go to a couple in a week, all you've done is eat Domino's, which at a certain point isn't very good for you. So again, I was once at a meetup where they had like 6 different types of cool IPAs, 2 types of wine, and water was the non-alcoholic drink of choice. So just think of being more inclusive and giving more options for everyone, which is hard. Being a meetup organiser, I know that. There are people that are gluten-free and vegan and all these different things, so it's hard to please everyone, but if you can be more inclusive, and it is really, really appreciated. And for the record, I really like pizza. Actually, sometimes I'll go and be like, oh, I really want a couple of slices of pizza. But it's not
it's just being more inclusive and thinking about how that meetup looks from the outside. I quite often have people say, oh, we'll organise a meetup and it's just a bunch of guys hanging around eating pizza. It's like, well, yeah, so it's a bunch of guys, you've just described it to me as, and it's just a bunch of guys sitting around eating pizza, and that's how you describe it to people, so why do you think it maybe isn't the most diverse group? This is really fun. So this is in the context of meetups and conferences. This is Women in Tech Bingo for a conference. And I sent this to a friend and we played it online. And like, oh, I've had that one. I've been asked if I'm a junior developer. I've been asked if I'm a front-end developer. All the examples are about a he. Which, yeah, it's just a silly little game, but it's a good example to illustrate some of the things that we have to work with. And quite often all in one day at a meetup. So again, try not to be the people that says these things or to call out other people, even in a friendly way, because we are the friendly community. And try not to assume that all women are here with their husband or that they're not developers. And on that, I think Emma spoke really well about this, about why representation matters and stereotype threat. So if you haven't seen Emma's talk, you should watch the video of it later, because she's made my job easy for me, which is lovely. I saw this really nice tweet, and it's from Scott Hanselman, who himself says that he is, pretty much in the majority in tech. But he is type 1 diabetic, and halfway through a talk, he had a bit of a kind of health moment and was able to check all of his equipment and stuff for his diabetes, and just carried on with the talk because he's a pro and he's great. And afterwards, someone came up and told him that their child had diabetes and how really, really important it was that someone was up there was like a total expert in their industry. This happened and they just done it and they got on with it, and how important it was to see someone up there like that. And that was a really good example of, you might not realise that you're being such an example to someone, but representation really, really matters. Seeing someone like yourself on stage at a conference really, really matters. So yeah, nope, wrong way around again. So again, I was really uncomfortable using this picture of myself, but it was a friend who made a point of saying, do you realise that picture of you in the pink stripy dress with all the guys in jeans and t-shirts, apart from Jonathan, he's got his legs out. How impactful it was seeing someone just being themselves, and I was just worrying about not falling over because I was on stage, but I just wore a pink dress that day. But someone else saying, hey, that's really, really important, and that makes a big impact for people. It makes you realise, like, oh wait, I have a responsibility to represent all women, which can be a bit of pressure sometimes. I think it is a good example, though, of a community where if there is the right kind of psychological safety and culture, you're not necessarily aware of it. I was not thinking about being the only woman up there. I was just really happy to have an MVP award. So, yeah, being the only can create a lot of unnecessary, possibly, pressure, which is unnecessary, because there are too many conferences that you go to that have all-male panels. You should go on Twitter and check for this, all-male panels. It's really fun. Sometimes they have all-male, all-white panels about diversity, which is really fun. But you should have a look. And for speakers lists as well. If you're a conference organiser or a meetup organiser, I realise it's hard. I've done it myself. But if you can only have an all-male panel, then maybe don't have one. We were actually chatting the other day with a few people that said, panels, I just don't like panels anyway, just scrap panels completely. But if you are going to have panels, try to make them as diverse as you can. Mostly because we all have sassy people like me tweeting about it, and it's really bad for your conference. But if you don't have a wide enough group of people that you know to have a diverse panel, then you maybe need to have a think about why you only know people that look and sound the same, and reach out and see if people want to join your community. And if you're on an all-male panel, maybe suggest that they don't, and use your voice as someone with a bit more power and with a few more advantages to say, this doesn't quite feel right. And I really liked this. Does anyone know of the Bechdel test in movies? Yeah? So was it 2 named female characters talking not about a man, I think is the rule. many movies fail. I'd love this for technical, for conferences. 2 women on the same panel, not talking about being a woman in tech, is the dream, pretty much. So I thought I would kind of talk a little bit about empathy online, because a lot of the way we communicate with each other is online. It's on Twitter, it's on our, and there's the elephant in the room that is Stack Overflow. Hands up, even after many years of experience as a developer, you don't want to post on Stack Overflow. I know, right? Okay, I'm seeing people that I see as like the go-to people for things even putting their hands up, which kind of makes me feel a bit better about myself. Stack Overflow is like the scariest place on the internet. And there are so many like cringy, and you almost need to laugh, examples of people just asking for help and people being like, correct you on how you asked the question rather than just answering your question, and it's just such a hostile place. What's good is they finally spoke out about it last year, and they're trying to make a change, and they admitted there was a problem and have set out a plan to act upon it. Now that's going to take a long time because Stack Overflow, they can't directly control what every single user is doing, but at least acknowledging it as the powerful company that is Stack Overflow at least helps, because for the longest time so many communities were just ignoring, no, but not everyone's like that, so we don't really need to act upon it. That's not us, that's just a few bad eggs. But by acknowledging it, it validates the concerns of the people that are being impacted by it. So I have one rule for interacting with people on the internet. It's the Destiny's Child rule. People who know me will know I have most of my life Way by Beyonce rules. But this one, if you're going to talk to people on the internet, my rule is, what would my mum say? Would my mum be okay with the way I've spoken to someone that day? It doesn't need to be your mum. It could be your husband, your wife, your kids, your cat, I don't know. But just stop and think, is this the real me? You know? People tend to have, there's so many people that when they're online, they're like kind of angry, and you talk to them in person and they're lovely as people. So I think be yourself and be the person that your mum or whoever would be proud of. And Beyonce. So I'd like to quickly just chat a little around the majority in tech. I realise it can feel like, to some, like I've kind of been attacked a little bit, or that everything's always around why we need people different to them in the room. It's not that we don't need you. We absolutely need you. And you're actually the powerful ones that can make things better for everyone else. You can make more impact than we can for now. And most of my mentors have been men. I've mostly worked with men. So many people in the community have mean so much to me because they have welcomed us in and helped us progress. So it's not an attack, it's a welcome to help us, and a thank you. So we made it through the inclusion bit, so we can have a wee hug now. So hands up if you have ever referred to someone as non-technical. And if you've ever referred to yourself as non-technical too. I give people into trouble for this all the time, and we'll talk later. So I'm so not a fan of this non-technical thing. What does technical even mean? Just because we write the code, we are the technical ones. Technical is relating to a particular subject, art, craft, or its techniques. So people who work in digital, if we call it that, they are technical. They're not writing the code. No, they might be doing the testing, the designing, the writing the specs, the dealing with the customers. But you are so technical. And I think we, as developers, we don't own the word technical, and we can't be gatekeepers for what technical is, because you often hear, yeah, they're not technical. You wouldn't understand, you're not technical. I'm not going to that talk, it's not technical. I don't know the right way to put it. Quite often it's non-dev, or I don't know the right term, but again, maybe sometimes there is a case for it, but just stop and think before you say to someone, you wouldn't understand, you're non-technical. I really like this article, which I can send a link out later on Twitter, which is If You Can Use a Fork, You're Technical, by April Wenzel, and she does loads of stuff around this, so you should definitely follow her. Developers love acronyms, and we love to talk in a language where people can't understand, because it makes us the experts, right? We're the technical ones, and it means that we can just say words and people will go away and leave us alone. Guilty. But I always have a rule of the first time I'm interacting with someone or on a certain project, if I'm saying what DNS is, I'll explain what it is. Maybe not always the right words, because you might not know them because it's just an acronym you use, but at least give a bit of context of what it is, because yeah, we speak in our own language sometimes. And the technical, non-technical divide isn't good for anyone. It isn't good for your project. You don't just deliver a project as a developer. You have all the members of the team. You've got people who work with the client, the project managers, the testers, the designers, everyone throughout the project. You need to work together, I think, as a team. Again, with psychological safety being the recurring theme here. You will build better products on time, on budget, hopefully. Not saying suddenly going to make things on time, on budget, but it will definitely help if you can collaborate in a way that everyone has an equal say. So I know we're kind of getting towards time, but I will want to just quickly chat about how we treat users. How many times have you got a bug report in and you've been like, oh, absolute idiots? Yeah, I think we all have, but it's back to the easy and just thing again, isn't it? It's like, just because you understand. I think quite often we are looking, so say your project's 6 months long, you're looking at it every single day, and you're like, well, obviously you click that button, that button, that button, that button, and it just works, because you've used it. So try and put yourself in the shoes of the users, and when they give a bug, stop and go, oh, okay, I never thought of it like that. Obviously, sometimes it's just silly and they've not click the right button or something, but at least reply empathetically, please. And diverse user groups need diverse teams. So if you're building an app for everyone, that's going to be used worldwide, you can't just have, a team of 10 developers in Scotland that all went to the same uni and they're all guys, because you're probably not going to cater for the whole world with that and all user groups. And I really like, this is an example, I was chatting about this yesterday actually, because someone's workout app was telling them, I think basically that they were being lazy and putting on weight, but she was pregnant. So these apps don't know if any do, but the ones she was using don't have pregnancy modes. And that's something that happens to a big percentage of the population. So why was this not an acceptance criteria for this? Why did it make it through the design team and the test team and the developers with no one going, sometimes people have babies, it's kind of how we're all here. So yeah, it's important to think about people that aren't just, ideally you would have a mix of people on the team, but if you haven't got that diversity team, at least think about it in your personas and your users. I'm reading this really good book just now. I've not read it all, but I started reading it on the way here, and it talks about how a lot of the world is built for men, and that's not like, a lot of it's unconscious bias, or it's just the way it's been through history, and that the default for a lot of things is men. And they give an example, it's not tech, but it's heart attack symptoms. A lot of the time women are sent away from hospital because apparently our heart attack symptoms are slightly different than men. So a lot of the right way to do things isn't based on a proper diverse look at society. It's based on historical facts and figures that tend to have been built up by men in studies. So it's an important thing to think about, because now we're using these data sets that are kind of corrupted or biased, and we're putting these data sets into systems that do machine learning and they do AI, and they're meant to reflect smart society. But human biases, even unintentionally, leads to machine bias. And there's some really, really horrifying examples of even face recognition. I saw a study here, I'll have a look at it. 1% error rates for men with lighter skin, and it goes up to 35% error rate when it's a woman, and it's with people with darker skin tones. That is outrageous, and it means that your data set isn't good enough, and that your testing isn't good enough. And it can lead to real bad situations, because we're now using AI to do face detection on self-driving cars and things like that. So it's not just people being sensitive and wanting inclusion. This needs to happen for the world to be a safe place in the future. And I'm only going to quickly talk about accessibility because Tiffany done such a great job yesterday that you should just watch that talk. And I know Tim mentioned some things this morning too. But I want to give the facts and figures around it just to show that it's not just being inclusive for inclusivity's sake. There is a business cause to do this as well as it being the right thing to do. So disability, this is in the UK, but affects 1 in 5 people at some point. And 25% of people with disabilities haven't used the internet. And this is for various reasons. Sometimes it's literally accessibility, and sometimes it's costs. If people perhaps can't work or have to spend a lot more of their money on mobility and stuff like that. So I think this is an important one to think about, back to that users or idiots thing. I think we're quite guilty, especially in tech, of thinking everyone's just been using computers since they were like 2 years old, and it's really intuitive and it's really easy, but not everyone is us. And this is the costs, this is the spending power of the disabled population just in the UK, £212 billion. So as a business, making sure your site is accessible, it's not just the right thing to do, it's a good business decision to do this. And I know personally from my own family how much tech can make someone more independent. I have family members that now they can do their own shopping online and get it delivered to their front door, and they're not dependent on others, and that's so valuable and so important to people and can make actual differences in people's lives. And I really loved this tweet. I think it was mentioned in the talk yesterday too, as you're not doing anyone a favour, it's not a nice to have accessibility, it's a must have. I think it's important we start to think of it that way. So I asked at the start, why should we talk about empathy? Hopefully I've given some reasons why it's important and why we can make sure we have it in our teams and our communities. And we went through these different topics. But what can we do? What can we as a community do and as individuals do? I think next time you're having negative thoughts about someone or you're about to judge someone for either their technical choices or otherwise, just stop and have a think. I think go back to that just like me thing and put yourself in their position. And by thinking of others, we'll be happier at work, they'll be happier at work, we'll be more productive, we'll make better products, and we'll be more profitable, so it's good for everyone. So I know we're the friendly community. We're proud of it. We wear it on t-shirts and hoodies and stuff. But what I'd really, really love is if we can go a little step further and we can not just be welcoming to people when we're here, which is so good, which we're really, really good at, and I'm here because of how friendly this community is. But I'd like to see us be even more friendly and welcome more people in rather than just be so friendly when we are here. And that's me. Just about made the time, so thank you.